Hey guys, today I'm going to talk about workflow from design. So whether you're a builder or a student or an architect, you're probably going to want to have an understanding of, how we could utilize things like a block and how we would go about using walls to ensure that we don't overstep the boundary or we design with the end product in mind. And all I have here is a very simple square block with a setback on the side and the front and the back, and I have a boundary. And in this particular instance, we're going to assume that you can actually have a zero boundary down this left-hand side. There's some things that you need to consider, and I'm just going to grab a wall here and I'm going to try and show you what you need to consider before you actually start to go pen to paper. So if you're going to use a solid wall, which is just a single skin wall, it's understood why you would use that to start if you haven't thought a little bit further down the track, just so you can get your form and function right. But there is actually an issue with that, is that basically if you have battens on there or anything like that, I'm going to just draw a wall that's solid without any battens or anything like that. I'm just going to draw, and you'll notice when it's starting to draw, it's actually drawing from, and I'll just delete this in a second. It's just drew from the external part of the wall, because in a solid wall that would actually be the structure wall. This would be where everything would load because there's only one layer of walls. However, when we went to say choose a different construction method, or we added battens or a product to the outside of it, say for instance I added some vertical battens and added some materials to the outside of it, so I go to my materials and I chose, let's just use the WeatherText board here, and if I started to draw, and I'll just do this back corner here and say this is a boundary. If I started to draw, you'll notice that what's happening is that it's drawing from the load bearing part of the wall. So therefore, if I actually drew this wall, it's actually sitting outside of the boundary, which might be different in other programs, I'm not sure. However, what I do know is that if we did want to draw from the outside of the wall, what we need to do is we need to use our right arrow button, right? You'll notice that it's justifying where the wall is drawing from, right? Internal wall from the outside of the load bearing, or the XY or pitching point, from outside of batten or outside of cladding, right? And therefore, if I draw from here to here, I've actually allowed for a potential finish. So even though at the initial stage of design, you may not have figured out what type of finishes, my advice is to actually choose the worst case scenario. Now, you can, if I go and say draw another wall down the front here, you can change it later. So I'm going to go here and I'm just going to use my right arrow and draw by default where PlusSpec will draw from. Okay, and you'll notice that I'm outside of my boundary again, and that's a problem. So what I can do is if I actually select that wall and I go back to my wall tool, you can also set up a keyboard shortcut for this, and I zoom in, most important to zoom in, and I can go push pull. What it did is it actually shortened the adjoining wall for me. I still recommend trying to spend a little bit of extra time figuring out what your boundary walls will be made of, because if it's brick, usually a brick is always the same size and so on. And there's a reason why you would actually do this now, and it may be different workflow in PlusDesignBuild or PlusSpec than it is in, say, Revit or ArchiCAD. I'm not sure. However, what I do recommend that you do is always keep in mind this point here of any wall, whether it be brick veneer or any type of wall. The reason being is that down the track, if you decide to actually go back and spend a little bit of extra time on figuring out how this is going to be built, if you're using, say, a double layer or double skin wall, the internal skin is always load bearing. So in this case, I'm going to choose masonry veneer. And therefore, if I'm going to draw this wall, and I'll go and draw on the setbacks all the way around, you can see that I need to now change the justification of the wall. So draw from the outside of the wall onto my setback again. And this way I'm getting my maximum home size or building size according to the type of construction. And the reason why we would take this into account is so important is because we're virtually designing projects that are going to be actually built. And when we actually say go to put a roof on this, let's say walls and generate roof from walls, we can make our overhang to suit the zero boundary if we want to. I'm going to say 160 here and go submit. Right? and you can see I could have turned my gutters off if I wanted to. But most importantly, the roof is supported by structure, obviously. So let's have a look. Let's go to our structure scene here, and we'll put some trusses in, and we'll see if we can ascertain where the problem's going to come if we start pushing and pulling walls around later. Going back to why I think it's important to consider the end product at the start. So what have we got? I'm going to go 0 overhang on all of my trusses here, and I'm going to go submit. Right, and I'll just quickly stick some trusses in here. Let's go say halfway up there, and we'll do the same from maybe the other end. Give it a second. And this is downstream. This is what's happening down the end, you know, the detailing stage. And unfortunately for builders to give a price on a project, they kind of need to understand what's involved in it. So they'll actually get into this type of detail to give you a price. Yet if you've only drawn this project as a very preliminary design, it means that the builder's going to do it twice. Or even worse, you don't actually, you get the plans through and we have this into construction, and then you change your mind on the type of boundary wall system you're going to use. We may have to move it around. So if we go back to all here and we say, okay, we're going to change this wall type to a different type of wall. So we might have to then go through and say, right, walls, edit wall, and we might choose maybe a different material on the outside. So we might go search and find blocks maybe. Let's just use a very overdone type there and go submit. Right, you'll notice that now it added the extra thickness of that block wall on. And what I would now have to do is I would have to push and pull this wall back in. So I'm going to go back to that push-pull command that I had there before. And I'm going to push this wall back in, say 200 millimeters. So I'm going to go all the way to here. I'm going to type in 200. Right. If I go back to my structure, you'll now notice that the truss isn't actually bearing in the right location. The span of the truss is now reduced because we hadn't decided what the product was going to be on the boundary wall at that stage. Now, I know it is a workflow thing that needs consideration, and that's the reason for this video, is before you start to draw on a set of plans, understand the construction of the wall type before you do it. And basically, if you look at these images here, it's going to show you the type of wall, but remembering always this point here is the load bearing point of the wall, and that is where it's drawing from by default. And that load bearing point of the wall is the point in which our roofs and trusses and everything bear. Hope it helps out, guys, because it's something that can be frustrating if you don't understand why. And I do hope this helps you understand why we want to ensure that we understand our boundaries and how far our offset is. And if you're not cramped by room, you have plenty of room and it's not every millimeter doesn't count, this isn't going to be a problem. But if you are, then I would suggest that you consider looking at utilizing different offsets from boundaries. So I'm just going to do one more thing here for you, which may help. I'll move this over here. You may just want to actually offset your boundary again. So you can use your tape measure tool, which is T as a keyboard shortcut, or here, right? And you can type in a distance. So we might say 200 millimeters or 6 inches or whatever it is. You can go and offset your boundaries before you start. Let's go 500. And then these would be your structural wall changes. I hope it helps out, guys. If you've got any questions, ask them below. If you've got any suggestions, by all means, run them past us, guys. We'll do our best to change it. But don't forget, you can push-pull your walls later, but it will have an impact downstream participants in the construction. All right, guys, cheers.